right, welcome back. We are continuing our reading of the Philip Yancey book called The Bible Jesus Read. It's a look at the Old Testament. First chapter is called Is the Old Testament Worth the Effort? And we are now in the section called The Company God Keeps. Hopefully you're enjoying this. You learn a lot about a person by the friends he selects, and nothing about God proves more surprising than the choice of companions, the hand-picked objects of his intimacy. Abraham pimped for his wife. Jacob cheated his brother. Moses murdered. David murdered and committed adultery both. Yet all of these ended up on God's list of favorites. Jacob got his new name, Israel, which means God struggler, after an all-night wrestling match with God. And ever since the name of God, people has ever since the name for God's people has harked back to that contest. God's people are literally the children of struggle. Now, right here is a footnote, and I'll read the footnote. It says Thomas F. Torrance, the Meditation of Christ, speculates that anti-Semitism may have its origin here. Israel's conflict with God, its love-hate relationship, mirrors our own. Instead of taking out our resentment on God, however, we take it out on the Jews, God's chosen people. Well, our real quarrel is with the searching light of divine revelation reflected by Israel. It is against Israel itself that we vent our resentment. There we have, I believe, the root of anti-Semitism. But wherever and whenever anti-Semitism arises, it's a clear sign that the people are engaged in conflict with God, and with some kind of conflict that left its mark upon Israel. No other people has ever engaged with God in the same depth or intensity of the contradiction between man and God as Israel. And that's the end of the footnote. Let's continue on. God has it out with loud complainers like Job, Jeremiah, and Jonah. He engages Abraham and Moses in lengthy arguments and sometimes lets them win. In his wrestling match with Jacob, God waits until daybreak to inflict the wound. Till then, Jacob holds his own. Quite obviously, God prefers honest disagreement to dishonest submission. He takes human beings seriously, conducts dialogues with them, includes them in his plans, listens to them. If the Old Testament's overwhelming lesson about God is that he is personal and intimate, its overwhelming lesson about human beings, what we say, how we behave, even what we think and feel. These things have an enormous effect on God. They have, in fact, cosmic implications. Those of us who live in an era that has viewed our planet from the perspective of spacecraft, as a tiny globe of blue and green suspended in the unimaginable vastness of the universe, have trouble believing that we matter. Ironically, it was our most advanced technological accomplishments, such as the Hubble telescope, that exposed our cosmological tininess. Ernst Becker says that we carry in our breast the ache of cosmic specialness, wondering how we can be an object of primary value in the universe. Basketball bad boy Dennis Rodman expressed the modern point of view. If there's a supreme being, he, she, it has a heck of a lot more to worry about than my stupid problems. Actually, much of the Old Testament is devoted to overcoming that very same objection among the ancient Hebrews. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him? Mesopotamian creation accounts portray human beings as almost incidental to creation, inferior beings made to serve at the whims of the gods to satisfy their personal needs. Genesis, in contrast, puts man and woman at the peak of creation and invests in them the freedom and power to determine and spoil all the rest. According to Cicero, the gods attend to great matters, they neglect small ones. The Old Testament disagrees, showing instead a God who takes delight in his people. The same Psalm 8 that begins with wonder at God's concern for humans continues, "You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet." David and the other psalmists seem stunned by the notion that a God high up in the heavens could care about what happened on this puny planet. But again and again, God irrefutably proves it to them. The message that our actions do matter practically defines the Old Testament. We profoundly affect God. A verse from Zephaniah in the Old King James Version expresses it well. "The Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty. He will save, he will rejoice over thee with joy, he will rest in his love, he will joy over thee with singing." Scientists today, even agnostics, grudgingly acknowledge an anthropic principle for the universe is so finely tuned that it seems designed to support the existence of human life. The Old Testament pictures far more than an anthropic principle at work. God reverses the flow of all religion, which until then had pictured the gods as supernatural beings whose actions filter down to affect life on earth. A god cries and it rains on earth. A god gets mad and lightning strikes. The Old Testament shows, and nowhere more clearly than in Job, just the reverse. A desperate woman prays and God sends a prophet. A disheartened old man refuses to curse God, and the impact reverberates throughout the cosmos. For this reason, it can truly be said that the Jews invented history. For them, history did not simply replace cycles of eternity. Human actions on earth mattered, and those very responses created history. The sovereign Lord of history allows people to exert an influence on him just as he exerts influence on them. Philosopher Glenn Tinder makes the distinction between destiny and fate. The Jews gave us all a sense of destiny, that we exist not in a meaningless world, nor to act out some God's whim, but we exist to fulfill a meaningful destiny ordained for us by a personal God. Visit a museum that contains artifacts from Israel's neighbors, and you can see a shift. In Egypt or Syria, you can view the gods Osiris or Lil or Astarte. A Jew can point to no such image, for graven images of God had always been forbidden. All he can do is repeat Jewish history, the story of a relationship. Our God spoke to Abraham, called Moses, summoned us out of Egypt. God, says Jack Miles, is like a novelist who can only tell his own story through his characters. In the end, I came to love the Old Testament because it gives me a history to enter into. As I got to know the characters who sought in their various ways to get along with God, I found myself in them. In different seasons, I identified with Job, with Jacob, with the teacher of Ecclesiastes, with the psalmists and their fluctuating moods. Through their lives with God, I discovered my own. For some time now, I have been asking friends, what is a relationship with God really like? How does it work? Imagine the varied answers I would get to that question from Abraham, Enoch, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Moses, Jacob, David, Jonah, and Job. Each of these had radically different experiences of God, and I can enter into and learn from their encounters. Life with God is an individual matter, and general formulas do not easily apply. Kathleen Norris tells of her experience as a guest at the Benedictine monastery, where the monks chant the Psalms daily, proceeding through all 150 Psalms in a month. At first, Norris felt confused and jarred by the dissonance of the Psalms, some of which expressed pious comfort while others cry out against God's absence or unfairness. Over time, though, as she got to know the monks and other guests who chanted the psalms, she realized that someone in the cloister was identifying with the words of each psalm. Each one reflected some facet of life with God. And those with eyes to see and ears to hear perceived the needed messages. Contemporary Christianity, with its narrow focus on the epistles, has, for me, neglected the truth. Growing up in evangelical churches, I got my pictures of the Christian life exclusively from Paul, who I would suggest is hardly a typical Christian. Paul had a miraculous conversion experience, had a history of miracles and supernatural interventions, and apart from Romans 7, bless that chapter, apparently had an easy time living out the lofty ideals of the Christian life. Or at least an easier time than I have had. Once Paul understood something intellectually, his emotions tended to line up in good order. Trying to imitate Paul, which he encouraged, is, in my experience, no simpler than trying to imitate Jesus. In the Old Testament, I discovered a rich tapestry of encounters with God that added an important background to Paul's example. In the Psalms, for example, I found disorientation, confusion, rage, despair, and anguish such that I had never heard discussed in my church. We were too quick to move on to a higher experience of spiritual victory. Astonishingly, I learned that these problematic psalms were the ones that New Testament, and especially Jesus, quoted most often. I've long struggled with the impossible ideals of the Sermon on the Mount and the self-assured God said it to so do it tone of the epistles. I found a remarkably different approach in books like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. They use a moderate golden mean approach. Make money, but not too much. Have fun without getting hedonistic. These are, in fact, the principles parents have always used in training their children. I cannot imagine rearing a 3-year-old on the principles of the Sermon on the Mount. I do not mean to draw a sharp distinction between the New Testament and the Old. Quite the contrary. It would be a mistake to read the Old Testament merely to contrast it with the New, or to add to our understanding of the New. It has a reality in itself. The Old Testament is not, as one theologian suggested, reading someone else's mail. It's our mail as well. The people who appear in it were real people, learning to get along with the same God that I worship. I need to learn from their experiences, even as I try to incorporate the marvelous new message brought by Jesus and developed by Paul and the others. And that's where we're going to end today. Next week we'll finish chapter 1.